Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're bringing you an explainer that digs into some truly incredible historical sources to map out a life that didn't just witness 19th century American westward expansion, it completely defined it. We are looking at the story of John Sunderland Eldredge, and let me tell you, this is a masterclass in resilience. We're talking about a guy whose life serves as a complete microcosm of the pioneer movement. He carried the tools, he blazed the trails, he crossed oceans, and he survived things that, frankly, just defy all logic.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Because before we even hit the pioneer trails, the sources point to a truly stunning piece of family tradition. The Eldredge roots go way deep into American colonial society. We're talking ancestors serving as constables in Massachusetts all the way back in the 1600s. But the wildest part? John Eldredge's grandmother, Annie Hanks, was allegedly the sister of Nancy Hanks. If that tradition holds true, that means John's father was first cousins with Abraham Lincoln. It really just highlights how deeply established this family was before they got swept up in the total upheaval of the 1830s and 40s.
To keep us oriented through the absolute geographical whiplash of this story, here's our roadmap. First, roots, faith, and exile. Then, blazing the Western Trail. Followed by building the Salt Lake, the Australian mission, shipwreck on the reef, and we'll wrap up with logic versus the impossible.
All right, let's jump into part one, roots, faith, and exile. So John was born in 1821 in New York, and he actually held off on joining his family's newfound faith until 1843. But when he finally converted at age 22, he was immediately thrust into this massive, highly consequential labor effort. As a really skilled carpenter, he literally built the physical foundation of his faith. He labored on the magnificent Nauvoo Temple in Illinois for 46 days, earning a wage of just $1.25 a day, and he proudly kept that certificate. But here's the flip side. They were building all this under escalating organized terror. Surrounding communities systematically burned over 200 of their homes, mills, and farms. The ultimate cost of their faith was forced exile. The entire community was forced to abandon their city and flee across a literally frozen Mississippi River in February 1846.
That desperate exodus led them to a temporary stop near modern-day Omaha, known as winter quarters. And I want you to really focus on this number for a second, 65. That was the age of John's father, Allinson, as they entered this incredibly deadly testing ground. They were completely displaced, weakened, and living in these flooded river bottoms. Over 600 people perished in that area alone, mostly from malarial fever. Allinson, at 65 years old, had absolutely no idea if he was going to survive the upcoming 1,000-mile trek across the plains.
And this brilliantly illustrates the pioneer mindset. Facing those incredibly grim odds, Allinson actually built his own coffin and loaded it right onto his wagon. But he didn't leave it empty. He packed it with three very specific things: his burial clothes, a sock of wheat for food, and his daily work clothes. It is just the perfect visual for their journey, isn't it? A completely grim acceptance of death, paired right alongside this dogged, relentless determination to keep working and living until the very end.
Moving right along to part two, blazing the Western Trail.
At age 26, John gets selected to join a hand-picked advanced pioneer company. This was an elite group of just 144 men. We're talking the best blacksmiths, carpenters, and experts, and they were tasked with blazing the original trail west. Now, it's absolutely crucial to understand that they weren't just wandering aimlessly into the wilderness. This was intense scientific reconnaissance. They used state-of-the-art instruments they'd acquired in England. They were taking daily readings with barometers to chart altitude and using sextants to determine their exact position. They were meticulously mapping out the most efficient, survivable route for the thousands of highly vulnerable people following right behind them.
But let's be clear, this was a highly contested, incredibly dangerous landscape. Look at this escalating timeline from April 27, 1847. John is out scouting in the morning when suddenly they are ambushed by 15 armed Pawnee warriors, stripped down and hiding right in the tall grass. The tension is just unbearable. The warriors demand tobacco and actually try to seize a horse's bridle. One of John's companions silently cocks his pistol, which causes this very brief retreat. But the second the scouts turn to ride away, sudden gunfire erupts. John and his team actually have to spin their horses around and charge the warriors just to drive them off and secure an escape. This was an armed, aggressive push through fiercely defended territory.
Which brings us to part three, building the Salt Lake.
By July 1847, the advanced company finally enters the Salt Lake Valley. But the work didn't stop, it just changed. They had to execute an immediate desperate pivot, from traveling to engineering their survival before the winter hit. And the massive manual labor required by carpenters like John was staggering. I mean, on the trail, he had already been clearing timber and digging out massive tree stumps just to widen the Hastings Cutoff and Echo Canyon for the wagons behind them. Once in the valley, they immediately dammed City Creek for irrigation and plowed 53 acres of crops. They knew that if they didn't get seeds on the ground instantly, the followers would literally starve. John then went straight to work constructing 29 log houses to form the old fort for shelter.
Amidst all this brutal, back-breaking labor, the sources provide this incredibly ironic and heartwarming human detail. Remember Allenson and his custom-packed coffin? Well, the 65-year-old survived the entire trek. In fact, he thrived so much in the new settlement that he actually gained weight and grew too large to fit in his original coffin. He literally had to donate it to a bereaved family. He then took that sack of coffin wheat, planted it, and shared the massive yield with his hungry neighbors. And John's dedication certainly didn't waver either. He ended up heading back east on the trail and actually rescued his own 10-year-old niece who had been driving a team of oxen by herself for 200 miles.
All right, part 4, the Australian mission.
Fast forward to 1852, and we experienced some serious whiplash in John's life. He had settled down, built the very first log cabin in American Fork, and had 2 wives. But then he gets called as one of only 10 elders to serve a global mission to Australia. He transitions overnight from a local builder to a global missionary, leaving his family behind across the Pacific Ocean. And the hardships started instantly. Their ship barely avoided wrecking at Christmas Island, and then they were quarantined in Sydney for smallpox. Worse, the local press had completely weaponized the news of polygamy, creating this intense notoriety before they even stepped off the boat. And the cost of conversion for the locals? Equally devastating. After John baptized a couple named the Chittendens, arsonists completely burned their farm, their barns, and their harvested grain. A neighbor famously refused to even help fight the fire, just saying, "Let them burn." Yet despite facing extreme hostility and economic ruin, John's mission was highly successful, culminating at 155 baptisms.
Let's move to part 5, Shipwreck on the Reef. By late 1855, John is finally heading home aboard a ship called the Julian Ann. But on October 3rd, the absolute dramatic climax of his journey begins. The vessel strikes a coral reef head-on. The sources say the crash sounded like thunder, and 20-foot breakers were continually bombarding the ship. It instantly turned the scene into pure pandemonium and tragedy. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer agonizing duration of what followed. Look at that timeline. John Eldredge and about 50 other survivors didn't just wash up on a cozy beach. They were marooned on the tiny, remote Scilly reefs for nearly 2 full months. Every single day out there was a grim exercise in resourcefulness. I mean, they had to dodge shallow water sharks just to survive. Their only water was brackish, scooped up with pearl shells from holes they dug in the sand. At first, they survived by scavenging these small red land crabs, until they realized it was turtle nesting season, which allowed them to capture up to 5 sea turtles a night for essential protein. The physical toll was just brutal. Women were literally tearing their petticoats to bandage the deep, severe coral cuts on John's feet. Yet, incredibly, John maintained his legendary hospitality through it all, making salvaged rainwater tea for the sick in their makeshift tents.
Finally, part 6, logic versus the impossible.
This brings us to a moment where hard, empirical data directly clashes with unconventional belief in a literal life-or-death scenario. So, the crucial point is this staggering dilemma. You have Captain Pond, an expert sailor. His logic is flawless, right? Empirical data and navigational charts dictate that they must row 1,500 miles west to reach the known friendly port of the Navigator Islands. On the exact opposite hand, you have John McCarthy, a fellow missionary. He claims to have received an unconventional spiritual vision warning that if they row west, they will capsize and drown. His vision dictates that they must do the logically impossible, row east, directly against the prevailing winds and ocean currents.
The historical facts present a pretty incredible outcome here. The survivors actually chose the illogical path. They launched east, right into the wind, on November 21st. But almost immediately, the sources report that the wind shifted to favor their impossible course. They landed safely on the shores of Bora Bora in just 3 days. And in one final, unbelievable twist of deliverance, John's missionary companion had lost his suitcase in the wreck, right? Well, months later, a completely separate merchant vessel found it just floating in the open ocean and mailed it home to him using the address written inside his Bible. You really can't make this stuff up.
John finally made it back to Utah in 1856, healthy and ready to serve as a civic leader and local militia captain. His incredible journey ended suddenly when he died of a heart attack while plowing his farm at the young age of 52.
But his legacy, it is absolutely massive. Just look at this number, 739. By 1979, from just his first wife alone, John Eldredge had 739 descendants. He had the skills to build, the endurance to walk the plains, and the pure ingenuity to survive a desert reef.
Which leaves us with a final thought to pull from the sources today. Let's go back to that moment on the coral reef. What does it take for you to pivot your decision-making when all the empirical data, the charts, and the expert experience point one way, but an inner sense or unconventional knowledge points in the complete opposite direction? When survival or immense personal cost is on the line, when does faith or trust in the unconventional become the critical component of how you weigh your choices? Think about how you balance data and belief in your own life. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.